Following a practical, repeatable, teachable system for developing leaders is an important step to delegating decision making and problem solving. This is part one of a 5-part series on how to develop up and coming leaders. Stay tuned and I'll share a first step that has proven to work well for me to develop leaders that make solid decisions I can trust.
Running a service business can be hard. It is not unusual for business owners in industries like contracting, home repair, auto repair, business-to-business services like janitorial, IT and accounting, and many others to feel overwhelmed by all the priorities facing them at any given time. Between addressing the needs of the customers, managing the employees, figuring out the financials, and getting processes in place, feeling like you're making significant progress on your business journey can be difficult. Welcome to Service Industry Success, hosted by Brian Harding. Each week, Brian will look at real-world strategies for building the business you are dreaming of, while also sharing tactics to get through some of the most frustrating parts of business ownership with a lot more ease. Let's get started.
For many business owners and leaders, a problem they desperately want to solve is developing effective leaders in their organization. They want people who can delegate decision making, problem solving, oversight, teaching, training, all those things, so the business owner or leader can get out of the weeds and focus on other things, or take a break, here and there, take a vacation, or take a day off, or focus on bigger picture things. While this is both important and urgent, it's also common to not really have certainty about where to start, how to start, what are the specific things. There's probably, next to religion and sales, there's probably more books out there on leadership than any other topic. And so it's not a lack of information. It's just a lack of, knowing where to start. Like what's the plan? And that's the problem I want to address in this episode. In the subsequent episodes is, what is the starting place for leadership development? In this episode specifically, I'm going to talk about, one, like a first step. Again, I want to be clear here. This is not the first step. This is just a first step I've used that has proven effective over the years. But for most, we want to put people in leadership roles who have demonstrated an ability to take responsibility or consistently solve problems, develop good rapport with customers and coworkers. They often have industry knowledge that they utilize well. And perhaps most importantly, they have a desire to excel and advance their career or advance their skill set. But we don't always know where to go from here. Like, we have those fundamental things, like they take reasonable amount of responsibility. They seem to do okay problem solving. They seem to want to grow and advance. But now what? So it's often, when we put these people in these roles, we're often just navigating through trial and error, which is super painful and, quite frankly, not efficient. It doesn't free the business owner up. It takes a great deal of time to develop the trust we need with customer problem resolution and happiness, and maintaining the culture we want, developing a productive balance of accountability and grace with employees to keep improving while not being too overbearing, and most of all, becoming a person, this new leader, we can have confidence that our problems are reactively and proactively being addressed in a manner that aligns with our values, principles, and priorities. So the logical question is, like, where do we start? What is step one? Well, for me, a good place to start, and again, this is not speaking theoretically, this is how I did it, is identifying or developing a process of leadership. So when we say leadership, what do we mean? What do we want them to do? Like, when we say we want them to be a leader, what is leading? Now, when I ask a question like this, it's almost always confused with a different question, and people start giving answers like, well, leadership is integrity and honesty and good communication and follow through, or inspiration, compassion, empathy. And that's not what I'm asking. I'm saying, what is leadership? Not what are the characteristics of good leadership, like integrity, honesty, follow through, all those things we just said. Like, what is the leadership process? What is step one of leadership? What is step 2, 3, 4, whatever the steps are? So for many other important actions we want carried out, there's typically an agreed upon way we have for doing a thing, whether it's documented or not. Like, if you're in a accounting firm, here's our process for, receiving information from the client. Or if you're in a plumbing industry, here's our process for running a service call. Like we have processes for all kinds of things, but arguably the most important thing, leadership, when we talk about like what is the process of leadership, we often don't know. We just want a good result. We just want the problems to go away. We just want them to be productive and helpful and make our employees better and take care of these issues. And but when we say like what is the process of leadership, oftentimes we don't know. And I think this is why this is step one for me is why should leading be any different? How can we coach somebody up to improve on a skill that does not have a defined beginning, middle, and end, or milestones or indicators to tell us we're on the right path? We need a repeatable, teachable methodology that we can replicate to create a cohesive team of leaders who have a consistent approach. But if we can't define that approach, we can't define the process of leadership, how in the world would we accomplish that? How can we possibly coach people up or identify where they went wrong if we don't have a repeatable, teachable, consistent, proven leadership process? So before I share my leadership process, I want to make clear that it's not my intention that you just adopt my leadership process. I'm just sharing mine as an example. I am, however, strongly suggesting that you do have a leadership process that you teach, follow, and hold your up and coming leaders accountable to follow. So, again, for absolute clarity here, I'm not saying my leadership process is the one. I'm just saying it's the one I've used. And if you want to have a different one, fantastic. But have one. How could we possibly again, you look at all the things your employees do in your company, and when they do them wrong, you have kind of an agreed upon process, whether it's written or not. Here's how we do this thing. Here's where you zigged when you should have zagged. Here's the step we should have taken that we didn't, or the step we shouldn't have taken that we did. Well, I believe we have to do the same thing with this leadership stuff. So here is my leadership process. It's super simple. There's nothing revolutionary here. You're probably doing most of this anyway. It's just not really generally people have not put this into words or put this into a verbal or written process. And I'm not suggesting you have a written process for this, by the way, but just meaning like there's nothing new under the sun here. That's not you're not going to be like, oh wow, that's a great way of doing this. We're all doing this stuff. But if we don't have a leadership team who knows a process to follow, they're just going to wing it. They just do what their gut tells them, which often results in just telling people what to do. In my opinion, that doesn't always work out so well. So, step one for me, again, it's a 3-step process. Step one for me, identify the goal. The goal could be a behavior, an action, an outcome of a one on one conversation, an outcome of a group conversation, a long or short term improvement, a long or short term initiative, implementation of a thing, development or improvement of a process. It covers all situations. And oftentimes, it's a step that is skipped. Up and coming leaders often see a conversation as the finish line. Like, I'm just going to go tell Bobby to do a thing and like wipe my hands of it. And like, I did my thing. I did leadership. And I don't think that's really the way I would want things done, I should say. So we need to have, part of built into their, again, leadership process as they go about doing things is step one is what is the outcome we want? What does success look like? What is the goal? And if we don't take a moment to do that, we're going to be in trouble. You know, they oftentimes again they just like do knee jerk reactions and the outcome becomes just like getting this thing off my plate, like telling Bobby to do a thing or just like don't do that again or those quick conversations. And I just don't believe that that's really all that useful because as you heard me say before, if telling people worked and it was all it was needed, we wouldn't have just had this conversation about the thing that I probably have told you 12 times before. So, step one for me, identify a goal. So, when a leader comes into my office and says, hey, we got this problem, what do you think we should do? My first question is, what do you think the goal is? And again, the goal could be short term, a conversation. It could be short term over a couple days, like we're going to fix this problem we have, or it could be long term. Like one time we had to develop a whole training center in our company. And that was like maybe a year long process by the time we built out the room and put all the things in there we needed and developed a curriculum. Like it was a long term solution. We still started with what is the goal? The goal was to have a completed training room that was utilized and helped our employees get better. All right. So that's step one. Step two, then, again, often skipped, is establishing where are we at now relative to that goal we've established. What's our current performance level, or what stage are we in this rollout of this initiative? Relative to where we want to end up. Where are we at now compared to where we want to be? And identifying this leads to using our gut to tell us how we're doing in a given area, which can, especially for new managers, new supervisors, or people who've not been doing it a long time. Sometimes they overestimate, they underestimate, or they use just wild, inconsistent guesses to determine our actual performance level. And part of what I want to instill in people is, yeah, we can use our intuition. I'm not anti that at all. But if we just strictly rely on our gut, oftentimes it's not going to be right. There's plenty of times in my life, in my career, where my gut instinct told me one thing, and I pull the data, and I'm like, oh, it's actually not anywhere near where I thought. We're doing way better at this than I thought. Or we're doing way worse than I thought, or whatever. But I want to have a leadership team that understands the value importance of information, data, and objectivity, rather than gut instinct and emotional reactions. Like there's a time for intuition. I'm not saying to dismiss that. I am saying that, and I want to see their homework. I want to see their I want to see what's the saying, like when you used to do algebra, like show me the work, right? You didn't get credit for getting the answer right if you didn't show me the work. I kind of want that. And at least for a while to develop a sense of how accurate is their gut feeling, for instance. But more importantly, I want to be making decisions on objective things, not emotional, rash assumptions. So that's step two: identify or establish where we are relative to the goal. And then step three, again, nothing new under the sun here. This is stuff we all do intuitively. Step three is just facilitate the behaviors and processes to reach the goal. Now, facilitating the processes, AKA telling people what to do, is often the sum total of a new leader's entire leadership process. And I can tell you from personal experience of having hired people who supposedly had, one gal had 22, 25 years of quote unquote leadership and managerial experience, and the sum total of her leadership process was just telling people what to do. And predictably that didn't generate consistent positive results, let's say. And again, as noted in my number one rule of training, if telling them worked, I wouldn't be having this conversation. So if my entire process is telling them a thing that I know is not going to work, well, it's pretty easy for me to predict how the results are going to be for that. So again, step one, identify the goal. Two, establish where we're at relative to that goal. Three, facilitate the behaviors and processes to reach the goal. So whenever they come into my office and say, "Hey, we got a problem with Johnny, the employee, or this customer over here, or this thing broke and we need to fix it," it's always the same three-step process. What's the goal? What's the outcome? What's success look like? Where are we at now? What do we got to do to get there? It's that simple. And again, nothing revolutionary here. It's stuff we're probably already doing. However, oftentimes one or two, generally the first two steps, are skipped, and they just come in and say, "This thing happened. I just told Johnny to go fix it." Okay, well, what does success look like? What's the goal? Where are we at now? And sometimes these things, obviously, some versions of this will be much shorter and faster than others. Sometimes there's not a lot of complexity to what the goal is, you know, and other times there is a lot of complexity to it. And I'll roll with whatever is needed in the moment for this situation. I'm not trying to drag something out and make it a big, mountain out of a molehill kind of a thing. I do want to teach the leaders to have a prescribed process they follow to do leadership. So whether you use mine or come up with your own, I have found it is much easier to teach the art of leadership when we have a proven, understood process we all adhere to. So we're all doing things the same way. If we don't have that, one person's emotional reaction will be easier or harder than somebody else's. And that's where you find situations where employees choose to go to this manager instead of that one because they like the answer this one's going to give better. And we don't develop this cohesive team that I want. We're all doing things the same way. So again, whether you use mine or your own, I have zero preference on that. I do highly recommend we all have a process to teach what is leadership. So if you find the information I share on here helpful, please share this podcast with a friend or colleague you think could benefit. One of the things I hear people ask about the most is how do we do leadership development? So this would be a fantastic podcast to share with a friend. And of course, public sharing is appreciated also. And that's it for this week, and I'll talk to you all next week.